Afternoon all. This was the first conference I ever spoke at, and it's my third speaking event here, so I'm delighted to be back. It's an excellent event, always well attended, and great speakers. A lot of what I talk about publicly is generally things that I do in my day job, things that haven't went so well, my learnings, failures, those kind of things. But a couple of years ago, I was blogging about imposter syndrome, and I always wanted to come and speak more about these kind of things that aren't necessarily the nitty-gritty of what I do on a day-to-day basis. The blog started gathering legs, and I started thinking about putting a presentation together. But more importantly, why I think it's prevalent in cybersecurity, why I have it, and what we can do about it. Every time I do this presentation, it generates conversation, which is awesome, and it gives me more content to speak about the next time. So it's an evolving presentation. So a few disclaimers for those who've seen me before. I like memes. I don't take myself too seriously, for those who know me personally. And I have imposter syndrome, hence the chat today. So who am I? This is my 20th year in IT, I think, bizarrely, which seems crazy. But I've only spent 8 years in InfoSec. I started at the train line, where I moved from a sort of tech analyst role into PCI compliance. Probably not the most glamorous of starts in InfoSec, but that's what got me my route in. I then moved back to Scotland and I joined Skyscanner. That was probably the 3 years where I learned the most in my entire career, let alone cybersecurity. Super agile, tech business, awesome people, and very much a name that I'll continue to talk about probably for the rest of my career. I then spent a bit of time at Capital One in their cyber leadership team before being poached to come to Photobox. So my role at the moment is actually head of cloud security, looking after AWS security for 4 of our 5 brands. I'll explain a little bit more about AWS later on and why it's a fascinating but difficult area of security. Some other things I do, so I guess I'm a public speaker because I do these things. Be under no illusion that sometimes this can be terrifying. We might make it look okay, but actually 5 minutes before doing these things, it's all sweaty palms, and they can be very nerve-wracking things to do. Very enjoyable, and I do enjoy doing them. I run a security meetup in Scotland. If there's anybody who talks publicly who wants to come and speak for us, please come and find me later on. I run an AWS security Slack forum. When I say run it, I facilitate it. I created it and it's there. There's some really cool people on it. Again, if anybody wants to join, please come and see me. And somebody else made this comment about me, that I'm a regular LinkedIn brain farter. So I thought I'd put that in. I'm pretty opinionated when it comes to areas of security, and I generally put it out there. So this is always an interesting start to this presentation. And I've had different responses in the rooms that I've given this presentation to. Can I have a show of hands for 2 questions? So the first one, who has heard of the term imposter syndrome? That's less than half the room. Interesting. Who thinks they have it? Well done for admitting or being brave to say that. I've been in a room where I did it first time round, where almost nobody had heard of the term imposter syndrome. And I've been in a room where almost everybody had heard of it. So it's actually interesting to see at least half the room have not heard the term. So I'd like to use this presentation to describe what it is, why I think I have it, and hopefully some of this resonates. Have you ever had these kind of feelings? When you're in it doesn't necessarily have to be your day job either. And again, I'll explain on some later slides that I have imposter syndrome in my personal life, in my family life as well, occasionally. That you feel like a fake. You feel like you've tricked your way into either the job you've got or the situation you find yourself in. I'm lucky, that tends to come up quite a lot. I've achieved things through luck rather than through hard graft or doing the right things. I put in I'm out of my depth on this one. I find that I'm out of my depth quite a lot. Not necessarily imposter syndrome specifically, but at times when you walk into meeting rooms with senior people and you feel like you don't deserve to be there because these are experienced pros, and somehow you're tricking your way into being into those scenarios. So this is not something for me that's prevalent in every minute of every day. Sometimes it doesn't present itself for large periods of time. But there are occasions where I find myself in situations, this might be one of them, where speaking to a room of 100 people, makes me feel that I have some kind of imposter syndrome. So this is the dictionary, or the Wikipedia definition, if you like. So it's known by a few other names: fraud syndrome, imposterism. That's the first time I'd heard that. And it's a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. I've been in meeting rooms before where I expect somebody to come and tap me on the shoulder and say, okay, joke's over. You've had your fun, off you go. And actually, it can become more prevalent as you progress through your career, or if you find yourself accelerating through a career quite quickly. I spent 12 years in IT before I started in security, not really going anywhere, not really doing anything, and I wasn't particularly good at it. And then I found that since I've joined cybersecurity, I seem to have progressed quite quickly. So sometimes that can be tricky as well. Sorry, bear with me. So when I was researching types of imposter, I came up with 5 types. And even if you don't know what imposter syndrome is, or you don't think you have it, I'd really love to see if some of this resonates. And I actually, out of the 5, I think I only relate to one of them. Because I think we all do this in our day jobs. So the first one is the perfectionist. If you're a really driven individual, sometimes you set your goals far higher than you can actually achieve. So then when you don't achieve those goals, you feel like you failed. You feel like you are that imposter because you didn't actually achieve what you said you were going to achieve. I would say this is as prevalent in the internet industry that I work in than anything else I've ever worked in, because it's very driven individuals that experiment with things, fail regularly, but it can lead to some of that imposter syndrome related things. The second one is the Superman, and we all work crazy hours sometimes. That's what cybersecurity is like. But sometimes if you feel you're not talented enough, you might end up spending more time at work to try and make up for the fact that you don't think you're talented enough. When I worked in the banking industry, it was very much seen to be staying late because that got you your good appraisals and things. But your own perceived lack of ability means I need to put in more hours to this job to make up for perhaps my colleague who's smarter than me. I don't put myself in this bracket. I try and have a decent work-life balance, or work-work balance, as I tend to call it. The genius, I'm definitely not this. This is the idea that if something's difficult, the very nature or the reason that you find it difficult means that you've essentially failed. Cybersecurity is notoriously difficult as a topic, and I don't think I've ever found anything particularly easy in cybersecurity, so that by its nature can be seen as a failure. Do you expect things to be easy in your day job in cyber? I don't. I find it very taxing. I probably do relate to this one. This is the individualist. I like working on my own. I like to work out problems myself if I can. Sometimes I can be shy asking for help because I perceive it as failure by asking for help sometimes. I tend to like to think that I can do things myself at work where I can solve problems. Sometimes the quickest way to get to an answer is just to go and ask somebody who's already done it, rather than slave for hours trying to get there. I'm definitely not this. We all call ourselves experts in cybersecurity, but I've yet to meet one. Somehow that you've tricked your way into your job. I remember getting the call to take the Skyscanner job, and I just thought, I have no idea how that's just happened. It was a whole stack of interviews, but the job that I've got now, I had about 15 interviews or so for that job, and I still, at the back of my mind, thought, I've managed to bluff my way into this awesome organization. How did that come about? The thing I talked about before about being kind of found out at some point that you're not what you said you were in your interviews. Generally, it's other people who tell you that you know things or that you're quite good at things. I find that quite difficult sometimes. So what's it connected to? Again, when I was doing some research on this, these are some of the things that came up. I want to separate imposter syndrome from mental health or other things that do get talked about in our industries, because I feel that they're two different things. But when you look at some of the things that imposter syndrome can be connected to and why it's prevalent, it's quite interesting. I don't actually associate my imposter syndrome with any of these other than the one on the bottom, which says excessive self-monitoring with an emphasis on self-worth. I'm constantly analyzing what I do, whether it's good enough, whether it's the right thing to do. And again, not just in my day job. Are the decisions I'm making at certain points in life the right things? And it can be difficult because that can cloud your, excuse the pun, cloud your judgment sometimes about what the right things to do are. But it has been related to depression, anxiety, where again, people are just sort of doubting their talent. And being a perfectionist, cyber's a very difficult sphere to be a perfectionist in. So why is it so prevalent in security? That's the kind of crux. I do see it more in this industry than I did when I worked in the banking sector as a developer. Not just because I have it, but I feel that people who don't know what it is or say they don't have it probably do have an element of it. So why is it here? Because bloody security is hard, right? It's just a really difficult subject matter. I started Googling applications and services and just trying to get a feel for what was out there and came up with a whole stack of pictures. This is just a mix of some of the things that we might use on a day-to-day basis. Jira, GitHub, AWS, Kubernetes, serverless, Kibana, you name it. I mean, these are just applications. But they're vast applications that require knowledge and training and learning. I only use a facet of those. I saw this on Twitter just last week, so I added it. These are just cyber products in Israel at the moment. I mean, there must be 200 odd products on there. How are you supposed to keep on top of that? How are you supposed to know a bit about all of those things? This was the bigger one that went into kind of all the facets of security that we might be involved in. And it's absolutely crazy. In the jobs that I've done over the last few years in cybersecurity, I've probably touched on a lot of these areas. And I know a little bit about each of those areas, but I'm by no means an expert in any of them. So this is just to give an idea of the scale of some of the things that we deal with. Amazon, I mean, I took this picture from last year. That is the list of Amazon services at the moment. So there's more than that now. Again, 130, 140 services within Amazon. And you're supposed to be an expert on this, and I'm supposed to sit in rooms with people and tell them how they should be building this stuff. It's very difficult to do. I mean, I've been working with AWS for 3 years, and I think I'm okay at it. So it's lifelong learning and career learning, these things. When I joined Photobox, I actually joined as the head of engineering, or security engineering, excuse me. And I realized that nobody was managing AWS security across 4 brands, so I decided to make a role and build a team. But I question whether I'm any good at it, almost all the time. So I've started a role that I don't know enough about yet. I'm trying to build a team that can help me in a company that isn't doing as much with it as it should. So of course, it's not just all about products or solutions. Can you keep me okay for time? I'll just kick me over. So one night on LinkedIn during my brain farts, I decided to try and list all the areas of security that I'd been involved in that year, I think it was. And I stopped at 50. These are just some of them. And some of them are fascinating. Cryptography, you can go to university and study just cryptography for 4 or 5 years and do a master's in cryptography. And I've had to sit in rooms with bosses telling me, you don't know enough about cryptography. Well, of course I don't, because there's 50 other things that I've been trying to learn as I go along. And these are really in-depth things to learn. Now, some of you will be in jobs in cybersecurity where you're quite focused on an area of those, but for many of us, we have to touch on all of those things. So the first time I did this presentation, I hadn't spoken for a year because of the company that I was at, and I wasn't able to speak at these kind of events. So I wanted to do this imposter syndrome talk. I prepped like hell for this talk because it was the first one in ages. I recorded myself doing it, which I've never done that for a presentation at all. I had it all ready to go. I was nervous. I got 5-6 minutes in, and I found that I'd sent the wrong slides. And the slides that I had a whole stack of notes on them. They weren't the slides that I was meant to be presenting. Now, I can riff with the best of them. I can kind of bluff my way through it, and it threw me completely. The room was deadly silent, could hear a pin drop, and I had to just stop and say, I need to go and get my laptop from the back of the room to get my slides and start again. The longest 2 or 3 minutes of my entire career. There's a certain irony that picture is me trying to plug my laptop in with the, where's the any key, Homer Simpson picture. And I got going again, and it finished. The irony is that I now use this content in this presentation to say how it kind of all goes wrong. So yeah, doing a talk about imposter syndrome where you cock up the slides, not ideal, not my finest career moment. Oh, it's on YouTube as well. So my biggest failure in my career publicly is on YouTube for everyone to see. Please don't go and look at it. I haven't watched it back because I'm not a masochist. Now this is interesting. I don't put this in here to suggest that I've done anything particularly interesting, but in the year before I got into security, I took a year out because I was working in the music industry, and I used to DJ and make records, and I had a radio show, and the irony is I had imposter syndrome in that. I used to make records and get signed to labels, and I would just assume that nobody would buy those records. I mean, they generally didn't, but it was the same feeling of, why would anybody be interested in this? Why does somebody think that that's talented or good? The flip side is generally these things are good, and we need to worry about it a little bit less. So again, I put that in there because this is spread across various parts of my life and career. So what can you do about it? If some of this has resonated and you feel that some of these things are that you have these things, what can you do about it? And these have been things that I've learned through my career, by the way, not things that I've read. First one, give up caring whether you're right or wrong. I care far less now about whether it's the right answer. I provide an opinion. I sit with rooms of smart people and we try and come up with an answer, but I'm not trying to dictate, or I don't get upset if I'm wrong. That's taken me 20 years of a career to get to that point. Number two is really interesting for me as I've progressed my career and I sit with some very senior people on a day-to-day basis, CEOs, CTOs, heads of engineering and things. Generally, they don't know what the answer is either. Sometimes we have this perception early on in our careers that a senior person is either more talented than you, more knowledgeable than you. They're just doing a slightly different job to what you're doing, and they tend to not know what the answer is either. That's why they've employed you to help them get there. Number three probably resonates to the YouTube thing. What's the worst that can happen? I mean, okay, the worst moment of my career is on YouTube. Okay, the world will still turn tomorrow and I'll still get up out of my bed and we'll crack on and have a laugh with it. Seniority is not a sign of someone being better. That probably relates to number two. I've met some incredibly smart people who run companies, but when you talk to them, they tend to have a bit of imposter syndrome as well, and they don't define themselves as being smarter. People are learning from you, even if you don't think they are. Trust me, if you sit in rooms with people and discuss things and whiteboard things, they'll learn from you. So keep learning. This is such a manic industry for trying to keep up to speed with things that are going on. So to keep learning. Understand that you'll fail all the time, every day. I probably cock something up every day at work these days. I added these two recently, so remove luck from your accomplishments. I'm tired of saying about myself, I'm lucky to be in that position. I used to think that way, and I'm trying to think differently about it. I've clearly managed to do okay because I've worked quite hard at it, and I've carried on learning, and I'm trying to stop telling people that I do feel lucky, but I don't think that luck was the major part of it. And try and embrace praise. Imposters like me find that difficult as well. When somebody says you've done a good job, you tend to think, maybe it wasn't as good as you're saying it is, or it's my colleagues that have actually done the hard graft. So, I've touched on a lot of the areas as to why it can be difficult, but is it actually a bad thing to have imposter syndrome? This is me at the second Scottish Cyber Awards, where I've been a loser 2 years on the trot, and I'm stood beside Bill Buchanan, who has an OBE for services to cybersecurity and cryptography, and if I ever thought I was getting any kind of ego in cybersecurity, standing next to those kind of people totally keeps you on track. These are just incredibly smart individuals who've done such great things for our industry. So it's great for controlling ego if you think that ego is taking over at any point. And I happen to have been a loser on two occasions. I managed to go to Vegas for the first time last year for Black Hat and DEF CON. I know it splits opinion sometimes as to the value of it. I had an awesome time. There were so many talented people in that space during that time. It was very humbling to be part of that group. So many more smart people than me. So I think it's good for humility. Syndrome, the word syndrome has connotations. It has connotations of it being not necessarily a bad thing, something that you can take a pill for to try and get better. Or I'm not sure the word syndrome is particularly brilliant for this thing. It has a lot of negative connotations. So I wonder if we could call it something different, potentially. So what else has helped me as I've tried to progress my career and kind of overcome some of this imposter syndrome? This kind of thing. 5 minutes before, when I sit there, nervous as hell, I deliver speeches, and you go away and you feel great about it, and hopefully people have learned from you. I'd like to think this will generate some conversation, which is awesome for me personally. The meetups, the Slack forums, the LinkedIn, it's all great because it just generates debate, and I learn from people via that. I also research the hell out of other companies. Most of my ideas in cybersecurity are not my own ideas. They're because I've researched companies that do it better than we do. So I spend a lot of time looking at Netflix and Spotify. Monzo are the new one for me. They're doing some incredible things, and they're putting it all out there publicly, which is very brave. Other training platforms are available, but these are some of the ones that I use, and I find these really valuable. Cloud Guru for me at the moment is the one where I'm doing a whole stack of AWS courses. I did have a guy on LinkedIn say, "You're the head of cloud security, why do you need to do cloud courses?" Because it's constant learning and constant upskilling in what we're doing. Cybery is free, so you don't have to pay anything. That's really valuable if people want to have a look at it. The only problem is there's not enough hours in the day. You've got to switch off at some point. I'm bad for sitting on Twitter all night trying to read blogs, and before you know it, it's 10 o'clock at night and you're fried. Reading, again, something I don't have as much time as I would like. That book on the left-hand side is probably the best book that I've read in the last decade or so. I won't repeat the title for the room. You can read it. It's very good at resetting what you should care about, not just in your career, but in life. It's very funny as well, if you get the audiobook. The middle one, Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh, sadly no longer with us. He was the coach of the San Francisco 49ers who took them from the bottom of the NFL to the Super Bowl in 2 years. And his whole leadership style is phenomenal. And that can translate to how you lead in companies. And then Gene Kranz, I'm a huge Gene Kranz fan. Took man to the moon, didn't he? And the failures that came via some of those things that they did. So I read a lot, I try and read a lot. It's not the holy grail for learning, but it certainly helps. So I like to leave people with a little kind of things to leave you with. All of you in this room are phenomenal. You're all doing awesome things in this industry. It's really, really valuable. If you have imposter syndrome like I do, please understand that you're still doing great things, and this is a fantastic career to be in. We're shaping how the world uses the internet and technology and data, and it's gonna set that for the next generation, for our kids and their kids. So what we do now is really, really important, and sharing all this kind of stuff is really valuable. So, you're all awesome. You can all buy me a beer later. Cool, thank you very much. Have we got time for Q&A?
Stu, thank you very much indeed for a very frank and open presentation on some of your attitudes to the world, and you're very privileged to listen to that. And it's something different in the cybersecurity world. We're used to listening to traditional presentations of threats and risks, etc. Really fascinating. I've got a couple of minutes up my sleeve for you.
Awesome. Okay.
Questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Please.
Or feel free to get me at a later point if you want to discuss any of it. You don't have to be...
One in the middle. Thank you.
Sorry, back again. How do you gracefully handle praise then with this? Because the difficult thing I've always had is accepting praise from people you feel like you're underserving. Underserving?
Yeah.
Underserving, yes.
It's difficult. I do find praise difficult because I work with such smart people that I tend to feel like they're the ones that should get the kudos. A good example, it's only myself and another person that are the cloud security team across the 4 brands that I work for. And I'm not a techie by any stretch of the imagination compared to the person that I work with now. Employed her to do a great job. Yet I feel like she's the one that deserves all the credit because she's the one building things and I'm more kind of strategizing and those kind of things. It's got easier over time to deal with praise, but I certainly find it uncomfortable. And again, when I go back to that dance music slide, that was a similar thing where I don't know if humility can go too far and you can just be a bit boring with it, but I'm learning to get better at it. I'm not sure I take criticism brilliantly either. To be fair, that can be difficult. If it's well intentioned and done in the right way, then I think it's really valuable. The internet world tends to do this radical candor thing, very Netflix style, and sometimes that can lead to some interesting conversations where you think things are a little bit more harsh than they could be. So the answer is no. I still find it very, very difficult to deal with it.
Anyone else? Middle again.
Hi there. As a sufferer myself, I'm interested to know whether you think it's cultural roots. I mean, I look at some of my American colleagues, and I wonder whether they just do a better job at hiding imposter syndrome, or whether it's just us Brits that seem to suffer more than most people, and whether it's something baked into us from the day we're born.
Yeah, very possibly. I know one of the comments that's come up previously was around, is imposter syndrome more prevalent amongst women than men? I would hazard a guess that it almost certainly is in cybersecurity because we're very male-dominated. Culturally is an interesting one. I think that's probably correct. I wonder if Brits, we're a little bit, I don't know, guarded. I suppose the only way that I would liken it to the mental health side is I think the more that we're able to talk about these things and sort of say, hey, I have this thing, but it's not necessarily negative. So if you're speaking to me in a meeting room and you wonder why I'm either not contributing, there might be reasons behind that. But yeah, interesting. I'll go away and have a think about it.
Okay. Stu, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Look forward
Thanks.
to seeing you at future conferences.